Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Undying Emperor's Fist. Bai Xiaochun murmured, his emotions surging and his eyes shining. He could already visualize himself, looking down at his opponent disdainfully as he unleashed the Undying Emperor's Fist to shocking effect. After a moment, he took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. On the one hand, the Undying Emperor's Fist could be used as a trump card, drawing upon all of the strength in his body, blessing it, and then using that force to destroy everything in his path. On the other hand, after using it, he would be completely drained and incredibly weak in terms of his fleshly body. For the time being, the Undying Emperor's Fist could definitely only be used as a trump card. At the moment, it was not something he could just casually use. Generally speaking, it could only be unleashed after reaching the third stratum of the tempered bones. The fourth level of the Undying Codex, the Undying Bones. To cultivate it, I'll need so much life force it's difficult to even wrap my mind around it. The third level can't even compare to it. It would be much easier back in the Heavenspan River region, where I can concoct medicine. The mere thought of the difficulties involved in cultivating the Undying Live Forever technique left Bai Xiaochun frowning in anxiety. The wild lands are barren and infertile. I need something that can stand in for life force. After putting some thought into it, he couldn't come up with any good ideas. He considered soul medicines, but although they were used like spirit stones by wildlands soul cultivators, they didn't contain much life force. After all, they were concocted using souls. Maybe I could find some common precious materials and then perform tenfold spirit enhancements on them. If I enhanced them high enough, they would eventually have indescribable levels of power. That was the only good idea he had come up with so far. Taking a deep breath, he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and began to utilize the methods described in the fourth level of the Undying Codex to cultivate undying bones. Before long, cracking sounds could be heard inside of him. They started out soft, but after enough time passed for 2 incense sticks to burn, they became so loud that they were like thunder in his ears. From the nature of that sound, it was easy to tell that Bai Xiaochun's bones were undergoing profound transformations. All of his flesh and blood seemed to be quivering, as though incredible pressure were weighing down on them. At the same time, streams of life force power were coursing into his bones. His skeletal system as a whole was like a black hole, emanating a terrifying gravitational force that sucked in all the life force around it. At the same time, drastic transformations occurred. As the process continued, the rumbling sounds grew more intense, and he began to tremble visibly. Sweat even began to pour down him. And then, he gradually realized that his fleshly body was showing signs of withering. As soon as that happened, he opened his eyes and ceased cultivating. His eyes flickered with bright light, and he frowned. I can't keep going. After only 2 incense sticks worth of time, all of the vestiges of life force from the medicinal pills I've consumed over the years were sucked away. Cultivating the Undying Bones is terrifying. If I had kept going, it would have damaged the very foundations of my life force. Shock still lingered within him as he looked down at his hands, and he suddenly sucked in a breath. I still haven't reached the first stratum of the tempered bones, and yet I can already tell that my defensive capabilities have improved. Although it was obvious to him that he was tempering his bones, it also felt as though he were tempering his body as a whole, and making it more pure. After a moment of thought, he sighed. There was no need to get anxious about the matter. What he needed to do was simply wait until he could find something to stand in for life force and then resume his cultivation. I can tell that if I had enough life force, then I could actually complete the Undying Bones in one shot. The obstacle I face now has nothing to do with time spent cultivating, just life force. His eyes glittered brightly for a moment before he calmed himself down again. After checking on his cultivation base and observing his nascent soul for a bit, his aura was beginning to thrum with fluctuations just like before. I had a bit of control power within my gold core. I wonder why I can't sense it now that my core has become a nascent soul? After some thought, he simply couldn't figure out why that was, except for the possibility that it was connected to his lack of nascent soul level techniques. What a pity. Could it be that my human controlling grand magic has been hidden away somehow? Why can't I feel it? I wonder what other strange things are going to happen now that I'm in the Heaven Dao nascent soul stage. It really was true that he didn't know much about the Heaven Dao nascent soul stage. In truth, few people in the world knew about it, other than the Celestial. In fact, Bai Xiaochun had the premonition that the miraculous secrets of the Heaven Dao nascent soul would only be uncovered by contemplation on his part. For now, I just won't worry about my control power or the undying live forever technique. Medicinal pills are too rare in the wildlands. Plus, I don't have any nascent soul techniques. If I want to speed up my cultivation, then there's only one way to do it. His eyes shone brightly as a smile of anticipation appeared on his face. For anyone else, it would be a deadly risk, but for me, it won't be dangerous at all. Most importantly, it will serve to rapidly increase my cultivation base. I can advance by leaps and bounds. In fact, this will be the most rapidly that my cultivation base has ever improved in my entire life. The time has come to perform some spirit enhancements on my nascent soul. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with determination and didn't contain the slightest bit of hesitation. He waved his finger, and dazzling light shot out as the turtle walk appeared. Thankfully, he had built up quite a stockpile of souls because of all the gifts that he had been given recently. Using them, he was quickly able to create everything from 1 to 14 colored flame. At that point, he closed his eyes and settled his cultivation base. Then, his nascent soul's eyes opened, and he stepped out of his fleshly body in nascent soul form to appear out in the open. He shivered at the sensation of being out in the open as a nascent soul. It was almost as if there were some type of frigid chi in the area that he could only detect as a nascent soul. Actually, nascent souls were particularly sensitive to frigid chi, and reacted to it in much the way that a mortal would react if placed naked into a snowy field. In fact, being in contact with intense frigid chi for too long could cause irreparable damage to nascent souls. Bai Xiaochun could tell that clearly. Actually, there were many things in heaven and earth that could injure and destroy nascent souls, with frigid chi being only one of them. The fleshly body was like a boat, and without that vessel, the nascent soul was like a baby tossed into the ocean. If any other nascent soul cultivator had been present to see Bai Xiaochun bring his nascent soul out into the open, that person would be so shocked they might not believe what they were seeing. Generally speaking, it was impossible for one's nascent soul to emerge after having just stepped into the nascent soul stage. Not even extremely strong nascent soul cultivators could do it. The blow struck to it by the frigid chi that naturally existed in heaven and earth would be too severe. Not even people in the mid-nascent soul stage would do such a thing lightly. And if they did bring their nascent soul out into the open, they wouldn't do so for very long. Only people in the late nascent soul stage, or perhaps those who had reached the Great Circle, would have nascent souls strong enough to bring them out into the open and face the frigid chi of the world. The only people who could ignore such frigid chi were devas. But here Bai Xiaochun was, just having stepped into the nascent soul stage, and already having brought his nascent soul out into the open. Although his nascent soul seemed to be struggling, it wasn't being hurt. Clearly, that was because this was a heaven-down nascent soul. "It's freezing out here," he said through his nascent soul's mouth. Then he turned back to look at his fleshly body, which was a very strange experience. After looking at himself for a moment, he burst into motion, flying over to sit cross-legged in the turtle walk. "So, does this count as cooking myself?" he muttered. Reaching out with his tiny nascent soul hand, he felt at the surface of the walk. "Well, cooking it is. I just need to add some fire." A strange expression could be seen on his face as his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and then he waved his finger. Immediately, the one-colored tongue of flame flew out and merged into the turtle walk. Moments later, a design appeared on the walk that then began to shine with dazzling light. He was confident in what he was doing, but still felt nervous. After all, when all was said and done, he was performing a spirit enhancement on himself. If anything went wrong, Bai Xiaochun could only imagine what it would be like if everyone thought he had been in secluded meditation for too long, and the giant ghost king finally came and opened up his meditation chamber to find a deliciously stir-fried nascent soul waiting for him. He shivered at the terrifying thought, and even considered flying out of the turtle walk. However, that was when intense rumbling sounds began to echo out. He screamed as silver light rose up, completely inundating him. The energy of heaven and earth erupted from the walk, pouring into his nascent soul. Booming rumbles filled his mind. Eventually, the sounds faded away, and the silver light disappeared. Bai Xiaochun in nascent soul form flew up into the air, looking terrified. Moments ago, he had felt like a rowboat being tossed about on enormous, angry waves. Terrifying. This isn't spirit enhancement, this is playing with death. At this point, he decided that he should just give up. However, when he looked down at his nascent soul, he suddenly realized that there was a silver design on it. Furthermore, his nascent soul seemed somehow different from before. As of this moment, his nascent soul had matured to a certain extent. Not only was it stronger, it was also much more resilient to the frigid chi of heaven and earth. It was an exhilarating feeling, and was normally the type that would come after spending significant time in secluded meditation, cultivating some powerful technique and constantly performing breathing exercises. And that was the result of a single spirit enhancement. Bai Xiaochun thought back to the feeling of the energy of heaven and earth exploding into him earlier, and then his eyes began to shine with excitement. This really is a secret magic for improving your cultivation base. Pursing his lips in thought, he recalled the information he had come across when he first arrived in the wildlands, regarding the successor of the Hell Emperor. That was when he had first been introduced to the concept of performing spirit enhancements on nascent souls. According to what people say, if you perform a 15-fold spirit enhancement on your nascent soul, you can break through into the mid-nascent soul stage. An 18-fold enhancement will get you into the late nascent soul stage. A 20-fold enhancement is the Great Circle. There probably isn't even a need to mention the legendary realm of a 21-fold spirit-enhanced nascent soul, which is guaranteed to push you into the Diva realm. Immediately, his excitement began to build. At the same time, he realized that performing spirit enhancements on nascent souls obviously produced different results than with other items. That was clear considering what he had experienced when performing spirit enhancements to a very high level back in the labyrinth. However, nascent souls were unique in heaven and earth, and behaved differently from ordinary objects, so that made sense. Looking down at the 2 to 14 colored flames he had arranged, he realized that his path to the peak of the early nascent soul stage was right in front of him, open and clear. Then he looked back at the turtle walk, and realized that unless the walk somehow suddenly malfunctioned, he had nothing to worry about. Suppressing such worries, he said, there definitely won't be any problems. If I don't do this, I'm gonna regret it. With that, he sent his nascent soul flying back into the turtle walk, where he performed another incantation gesture and pointed out, causing the 2-colored flame to begin another spirit enhancement process. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had no way of knowing that even performing a single spirit enhancement on a nascent soul was a heaven-shaking, earth-toppling accomplishment in the wildlands. Meanwhile, far, far away, in the very heart of the wildlands, was a city that vastly surpassed Giant Ghost City in size. It seemed as big as 10 giant ghost cities put together, and was completely golden in color. There was something indescribably noble about it, as though it were connected to the heavens. The sky above the city was filled with auspicious clouds, among which a dragon danced, a dragon that occasionally cast intimidating glances at the people below. This city was the most important location in the wildlands. It was Arch-Emperor City. In the eastern part of Arch-Emperor City was an enormous public square, fully 30,000 meters from one side to the other. In the very middle of that square was a huge stone stele, exactly 2,700 meters tall, green in color, and surrounded by soft, glowing light. It was a light that seemed so enduring that no divine ability in the world could make it go dark. It was as if, as long as heaven and earth existed, that light could not be destroyed. It was even capable of benefiting the cultivation base of anyone who basked within it. At the moment, roughly 80 names were visible on the surface of the stone stele. Those names were written in precise and clear fashion, and were the names of various chosen heroes, all of them extremely famous, the type who everyone in the wildlands had heard of and talked about. They were essentially household names. That stone stele was none other than the Hell Emperor stele. And as for those names, they were the candidates in the running to be the successor of the Hell Emperor. When the allotted time for the competition to become the successor ended, then whoever occupied first place on that list would be the successor. Because of how important that competition was, everyone in the wildlands was very interested in the names on the list. Currently, the first name on the list was Gongsun Yi, and next to it, a number could be seen, 7. That meant that this Gongsun Yi had already performed a 7-fold spirit enhancement on his nascent soul. To perform 7 spirit enhancements on a nascent soul, and live through it, was a fundamentally heaven-defying matter. Countless people had been shaken by the matter. Second on the list was someone named Zhou Hong, whose nascent soul had a 6-fold spirit enhancement. 1. The person in third place had a 5-fold enhancement. Going down the list, the numbers dropped down all the way into the ones. Unless something unexpected happened, it seemed obvious that Gongsun Yi would become the successor of the Hell Emperor. After all, not even Zhou Hong seemed willing to go past a 7-fold spirit enhancement. That was no surprise, since the success rate was extremely low, and a failure would lead to death. Because of the list of names on the Hell Emperor stele, and the glowing light which surrounded it, there were always soul cultivators gathered in the area. Not only could they improve their cultivation base because of the light, they also could study the names on the list at the same time. The name list wasn't static. New names would occasionally pop up, and sometimes names would fade away. Obviously, the names that disappeared represented people who had attempted a spirit enhancement on their nascent soul, only to fail and perish. As for the new names, they always caused a stir. Of course, the stir for a new name usually wasn't very much to speak about. After all, new names usually came with only a single spirit enhancement. The only thing that would cause a true commotion was when someone broke into the top 10. However, on this day, something completely unexpected happened with one of the new names on the list. The first person to notice the new name was a middle-aged soul cultivator who happened to be a member of the giant Ghost Legion forces that were stationed in Arch-Emperor City. Only a few years before, he had been part of the army that fought the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect at the Great Wall. However, by this point, the cultivators of the giant Ghost Legion had all been recalled to Arch-Emperor City for rest and recovery. At the moment, they were waiting for deployment orders to go back to the Great Wall. That middle-aged soul cultivator was seated cross-legged some distance away from the stone stele, doing breathing exercises. As usual, he was looking at the name list on the stone stele, when suddenly, his jaw dropped as he noticed a new name at the very end of the list. At first, a blank expression could be seen on the man's face, but then his eyes widened, and his aura began to surge unstably. What he was seeing seemed completely preposterous, and he was actually convinced that he was seeing things. He rubbed his eyes a few times, and then he looked over again. At that point, he simply wasn't able to hold back from crying out at the top of his lungs. Bai Xiaochun. His cry instantly broke the silence in the area of the stone stele. Countless soul cultivators who were practicing cultivation in the area opened their eyes. Most of them seemed confused. The name Bai Xiaochun seemed familiar, but at first, many couldn't place it. However, many of them clearly recognized the name, and were instantly shaken. Then, people look over to see what the middle-aged soul cultivator was looking at, whereupon more shouts of astonishment filled the air. Bai Xiaochun? How is that even possible? Bai Xiaochun, I remember. He's a major general from the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's Great Wall. He's that shameless bastard who figured out how to detonate pill furnaces. It's him. I knew that name sounded familiar. Senior Red Dust personally offered a bounty of a diva soul for his head. He's in first place on the execution list. All of the soul cultivators were shaken, and soon, as their cries of astonishment rang out, more people heard, leading to even more unsightly expressions. Originally, Bai Xiaochun's name was not very widely known in the wildlands. However, after the giant Ghost Legion's recent attack on the Great Wall, his name became the talk of the army, and from there, spread out into all of the wildlands. He had defeated the giant Ghost Legion over and over again. He had inflicted heavy casualties on the vengeful soul forces of the wildlands. He had not only led the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's forces to victories on the Great Wall, but his methods had been spread to the other three river source sects, leading to similar victories on other stretches of the Great Wall. Because of that, the wildlands had suffered defeat after defeat, which was completely unprecedented. Exploding pill furnaces, driving beasts to madness, soul convergence pills, any one of those tactics would have shaken the wildlands. Then there was the reward being offered for Bai Xiaochun's head, which skyrocketed to such heights that everyone in the wildlands was flabbergasted. Furthermore, his rank of Major General had been achieved by brazenly trampling the wildlanders underfoot with impunity. Because he had eventually gone missing, people started to forget about him. But now, his name had appeared on the Hell Emperor stele, causing instant chaos in the area. Countless eyes came to be fixed on the name list, where there, right out in the open for everyone to see, was Bai Xiaochun's name. It was not Bai Hao, it was Bai Xiaochun. 3 characters made up his name, and right next to it was the number 1, indicating that he had performed a single spirit enhancement on his nascent soul. It's Bai Xiaochun. He's in the wildlands. And he's not dead. This is too important. Hurry up and report the matter. People immediately began to take out bone slips and send messages to their superiors. It didn't take long for all of Arch-Emperor City to be completely shaken. 1. Trivia point. There was already a character named Zhou Hong in Ah, written with the exact same Chinese characters too. He was mentioned a couple of times in the early chapters as a chosen in the Spirit Stream sect. As word spread through Arch-Emperor City, everyone who got the news was stunned. For many, it took some thought to recall why the name seemed familiar, and some even had to ask around. In the end, though, everyone was shocked. Of course, there were some people who instantly recalled all sorts of things when they heard the name. Devil Bai has appeared, so, he's not dead after all. Not only is he here in the wildlands, he's actually in the nascent soul stage. Damn it, this is outright provocation. Bald-faced mockery. There's no way Devil Bai doesn't know about what happens when you perform a spirit enhancement on a nascent soul. He obviously did this all on purpose to make sure we knew he had come. Arch-Emperor City in general was shaken, but even more so was the giant ghost legion. Countless shouts of rage could be seen as people raced over to the Hell Emperor Stele. Of course, not everyone in Arch-Emperor City was very impressed with Bai Xiaochun's name. Many thought the stories were exaggerations, and that a person like him wasn't worthy of the commotion. This is outrageous. I can't believe that Bai Xiaochun is being so pretentious. How arrogant. How imperious. HMPH. Those are just stories, right? I refuse to believe that this Bai Xiaochun is as important as people say he is. He's a nobody. Obviously the giant ghost legion just wanted to come up with a reason for why they got defeated so handily. The fact that the other three sects on the Great Wall are using the same tactics just goes to show that Heavenspan Island arranged it all. Regardless of the specific reactions, though, the entire city was shaken. Generally speaking, the commotion would have died down fairly quickly, and things would have gone back to normal. But then, something else happened that no one was expecting. Even as everyone was looking at Bai Xiaochun's name, his name vanished from last place and then reappeared in the top 20. Next to his name was no longer the number 1, but instead, 2. All eyes went as wide as saucers, and yet, before anyone even had a chance to cry out in shock, Bai Xiaochun's name vanished again. This time, it moved up to 15th place, and the number 3 could now be seen next to it. And things weren't over yet. Bai Xiaochun's name vanished again, then reappeared in 8th place. At that point, the number next to his name was 4. Moments later, it shot up to 4th place, with a 5-fold spirit enhancement. Countless gasps of shock could be heard. However, the crowd was being filled with so much pent-up shock that eventually, they couldn't keep it in. Heavens, a 5-fold spirit enhancement. How is this Bai Xiaochun doing this? Everyone was completely stunned, battered by waves of astonishment, their minds spinning at what they were witnessing. Immediately, people began to send word to their friends and superiors. Before, only a few people had been stunned by the mere mention of Bai Xiaochun's name, with many people believing his reputation to be exaggerated. However, in the briefest of moments, he went all the way to 4th place on the Hell Emperor Stele, with a 5-fold enhanced nascent soul. Instantly, the people who had believed the stories to be exaggerated were left gasping in shock. What? He performed a 5-fold spirit enhancement on his nascent soul that quickly? What's going on with this Devil Bai? How is he doing this so quickly? I can't believe he's so reckless. Is he tired of living? The waves of astonishment that rocked Arch-Emperor City only continued to grow more intense. Every group and organization within the city heard of the matter, and reacted with complete incredulity. At the same time, more and more people began to fly over to the Hell Emperor Stele. There were also numerous streams of divine sense that converged on the area. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was in nascent soul form in his secluded meditation chamber in Giant Ghost City, looking very pleased as he sat there cross-legged in the turtle walk. Ha ha ha, I love this type of cultivation. This is how things should be done. The nascent soul Bai Xiaochun's eyes twinkled, and his aura surged with excitement. Not only did his nascent soul now have 5 silver designs on it, but he could also clearly sense how much stronger he was. I feel like I just spent a whole 60-year cycle in secluded meditation. After a bout of hearty laughter, he licked his lips and waved his finger at the nearby 6-colored flame. The flame flew over into the turtle walk, whereupon rumbling sounds could be heard, and another silver design appeared. He had performed another spirit enhancement. 6, 7, 8. Without pausing for a moment, he performed 3 enhancements in a row. By this point, 8 dazzling designs could be seen on his nascent soul, which thrummed with boundless power. Swirling colors could be seen inside of it, and at the same time, the frigid chi of heaven and earth was like nothing. Strong. So strong. Filled with excitement, he waved at the 9-colored flame. Moments later, a 9th silver design could be seen on his nascent soul. However, things weren't over yet. Heart-pounding, Bai Xiaochun began the 10th spirit enhancement. Dazzling silver light shone out from the turtle walk as a 10th design appeared. Bai Xiaochun could tell that his nascent soul was growing stronger and stronger, leaving him trembling with joy. He had often pondered how amazing it would be to become so powerful, but had never experienced the feeling. Now he was. Of course, to the people in Arch-Emperor City, the fact that Bai Xiaochun was performing one spirit enhancement after another on his nascent soul had them all scared out of their minds. They felt like one bolt of heavenly lightning after another was slamming into their brains. They watched as Bai Xiaochun's name went from 4th place to 3rd, and then from 3rd to 2nd. Then, without even stopping, it reached 1st place. Bai Xiaochun had performed an eightfold spirit enhancement on his nascent soul. If that were all there were to the situation, it might not have been a big deal. After all, what he was doing was not beyond the realm of what was clearly possible. But then, the number 9 appeared next to his name, and then 10. The soul cultivators were all shaken to the ultimate degree, to the point where it felt like they were in an out-of-body experience. He was performing spirit enhancements on a nascent soul, which was completely different than performing enhancements on magical items. If a magical item was destroyed, you could get a new one. But if you failed in a spirit enhancement on your nascent soul, you would be killed permanently. The Hell Emperor could have the audacity to require his successor perform spirit enhancements on their nascent soul. But to ordinary soul cultivators, that action was simply risking one's life. A single spirit enhancement was something many people could accept, and potentially a second or third. But any higher than that, and the failure rates were simply too dangerous. What everyone was witnessing here was simply a miracle. It was something the likes of which had never been heard of in the wildlands. It was complete madness. He went from 1 all the way up to 10. And he didn't die. Damn it, what kind of luck is this? Does he have a death wish or something? Not a single person was left unshaken. From their perspective, Bai Xiaochun was toying with his life in an act of complete insanity. Never had anyone dared to enhance their nascent soul in such fashion. Meanwhile, in 9 Serenities City, in a smaller palace adjacent to the royal palace, an enraged roar echoed out. Then, a tall, slender young man burst out from inside the palace. His handsome features were twisted with fury as he raged, Bai Xiaochun. I, Zhou Hong, put my life on the line to perform a 6-fold spirit enhancement on my nascent soul. How could you possibly dare to perform a 10-fold enhancement? How come you didn't die? Bitterness filled Zhou Hong's heart. Originally, his only goal had been to overtake Gongsun Yi, and he had been fairly confident in being able to do so. At worst, he would at least match Gongsun Yi's accomplishments. But as soon as he got news that Bai Xiaochun had appeared and performed a 10-fold spirit enhancement, his hopes were dashed. You must be using some trick to do it. Otherwise, there's no way you could succeed. Men, go out and search the wildlands. Find out where Bai Xiaochun is. Find him. In response to Zhou Hong's words, 9 Serenities City was thrown into a stir, and his orders were instantly carried out. Of course, the reason for all that was that Zhou Hong was heir apparent in the city. Similar scenes played out in other parts of the wildlands, both in the necromancer clans, and in other places that were home to people on the Hell Emperor Steele's name list. Everyone was trying to guess where Bai Xiaochun might be, and countless people began to search for him. In one of the 4 kingly cities, War Champion City, a thatched cottage could be seen atop a lonely mountain. Within that cottage sat a young man with sword-like eyebrows and eyes that shone like stars. Everyone who knew him personally was used to the placid, arrogant expression that he usually wore. However, as of this moment, his face was ashen, and his eyes glittered with disbelief. Bai Xiaochun, he murmured. A moment later, he looked down at the bone slip he held in his hand, and a defiant gleam appeared in his eyes. This young man was the only son of the most powerful among the kings, the War Champion King. He was Gongsun Yi, the second most powerful person in his generation in the wildlands, right behind Mistress Red Dust. 9 Serenities City and War Champion City weren't the only 2 cities to be completely shaken. Spirit Advent City was also thrown into a huge commotion. However, there were simply too many heirs to the throne there. In fact, there were more than 10,000 people who could claim a connection to the royal bloodline. Although some among those heirs could be considered chosen, none of them were as spectacular as Gongsun Yi or Zhou Hong. It was actually one of the young women in the city who was the most famous. When news reached Giant Ghost City about what was happening in Archemperor City, and that Bai Xiaochun had appeared, it also caused a huge commotion. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was unaware of that. His nascent soul sat giddily in the turtle walk, feeling extremely pleased with how this session of cultivation was going. Eyes sparkling, he waved his finger at his 11-colored flame. Heh, let's keep going. With that, the turtle walk began to shine with brilliant light again. However, this time it wasn't silver light but rather, golden. Moments later, the 10 silver designs on his nascent soul vanished, replaced by a single golden design. Instantly, his nascent soul grew a bit larger, causing Bai Xiaochun to gasp. Remembering that transformations would usually occur after a 10-fold spirit enhancement, he suddenly felt uneasy. My nascent soul isn't going to change appearance, is it? He watched nervously as the golden light faded away, and then inspected his nascent soul. When he found that there were no fundamental changes, he breathed a sigh of relief. Even stronger than before. Based on how things are going, it seems that a 14-fold spirit enhancement will be the peak of the early nascent soul stage. Normally speaking, even if I had some incredible techniques to use, I would need more than 100 years to do that. With those thoughts on his mind, he concluded that this was an opportunity that could not be passed up. Without the slightest hesitation, he began to work on the 12-fold spirit enhancement. Rumbling could be heard as a second golden design appeared on his nascent soul, and yet, he didn't stop there. Soon, a third and fourth design could be seen. A feeling of explosive strength filled his nascent soul along with the fourth golden design. Now he had the feeling that with a bit more effort, he could break through from the early to the mid-nascent soul stage. However, he wasn't prepared to do that at the moment. At this point, he had no choice but to stop. With that, he opened his eyes and looked down at his nascent soul. The difference between his nascent soul now and how it had been at the beginning was vast. "I've reached my limit," murmured. "However, once I perform a 15-fold spirit enhancement, then I'll break through into the mid-nascent soul stage." Even as he spoke, his nascent soul flew back into his fleshly body. When the fourth golden design appeared on his nascent soul, the number 14 appeared next to the name Bai Xiaochun on the Hell Emperor Stele back in Arch-Emperor City. When that happened, the observing soul cultivators were stunned to the ultimate degree. None of them could even imagine what would happen if the successor of the Wildlands Hell Emperor turned out to be Bai Xiaochun. It seemed almost too preposterous to consider. And yet, by this point, there didn't seem to be any suspense at all regarding what would happen in the end. It was at that exact same moment that the explosive aura of a diva suddenly rose up within Arch-Emperor City. Brightly colored light flashed in heaven and earth, and the huge dragon in the clouds above was clearly taken aback as a woman flew up from the giant ghost legion. She was beautiful and curvaceous, and yet possessed a murderous aura that was terrifying to the extreme. Furthermore, her eyes were filled with killing intent and madness. She was none other than Mistress Red Dust. Her cultivation base had long since recovered, but she had remained in secluded meditation, and was unaware of anything that was happening on the outside. However, her subordinates and high-ranking officers knew of her enmity with Bai Xiaochun, and therefore, had passed the news along to her. When she heard what the damnable, detestable Bai Xiaochun had done, it drove her into near madness. She flew at top speed to the Hell Emperor Stele, where she glared at the name in first place, her body trembling and her murderous aura surging. When people realized that Mistress Red Dust had arrived, they bowed their heads and clasped hands in respect. Everyone knew that despite the fact that she had only recently become the newest diva of the generation, her battle prowess was far beyond ordinary. Bai Xiaochun, Bai Xiaochun. A very grim expression could be seen on her face, and her eyes shone with cold light. As of this moment, she knew that Bai Xiaochun must have reached the heaven-down nascent soul stage. Anger burning, she pulled out a jade slip to send a message to her subordinates and officers. "Pay any price to find Bai Xiaochun. I want him alive." The army responded instantly. Soldiers began to rush to and fro within the army camp, issuing orders in preparation to follow Mistress Red Dust's orders and find Bai Xiaochun. In another location in Arch-Emperor City was a young woman who, like everyone else, was paying close attention to the situation with the Hell Emperor Stele. Unlike Mistress Red Dust, there was no icy coldness in her eyes, only anxiety and concern. She was none other than Chen Manyao from the river-defying sect. She was a wildlander, and her master was a very important person, giving her a unique status in Arch-Emperor City. However, she would never be able to forget everything which had occurred in the river-defying sect, the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, or the boat that had sailed across the heaven-span sea. In the years in which she had been back in the wildlands, she had often thought back to the familiar faces she remembered from the past. More often than anyone, she thought of Bai Xiaochun. Back when she'd first heard that he had gone missing, she had assumed that he was dead, and had slipped into disconsolate melancholy. But now, his name had appeared on the stone stele, causing her eyes to sparkle with dazzling light. "Where are you, Xiaochun?" Within the imperial palace in Arch-Emperor City was the Grand Heaven Master, the very same man who had ordered the Arch-Emperor to go into secluded meditation. He was the only person other than the Arch-Emperor who actually held power over the various officials in the dynasty. All of a sudden, the Grand Heaven Master opened his eyes. In that instant, the huge dragon in the air above the city trembled, and all of the powerful experts in the city shivered and retracted their divine sense, fearful of doing anything to offend the Grand Heaven Master. The Grand Heaven Master's eyes immediately pierced through all creation to land on the Hell Emperor Stele, and the name that occupied the first place position. A moment later, he looked away, and then issued a new order. Find Bai Xiaochun and bring him to me. The orders came out, not from the Grand Heaven Master, but rather, under the auspices of the current Arch-Emperor himself. Because of that, even the 4 heavenly kings had no choice but to acknowledge them. Before long, everyone in the wild lands was searching for Bai Xiaochun. Around that time, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, causing the entire secluded meditation chamber to fill with something like the crackle of lightning. At the same time, the pressure of the nascent soul stage erupted out from him. He took a deep breath, a look of delight on his face as he performed a quick inspection of himself. Sure enough, he was in the great circle of the early nascent soul stage, and his nascent soul had 4 golden designs on it. There was no way for him to hold back his pride as he swished his sleeve to open the door of the meditation chamber. Then he swaggered out in grand fashion. Even as he was considering going to show off a bit and make sure everyone knew that he was no longer in core formation, he sent out his divine sense to find that there was a huge commotion going on around him. He could hear people discussing a certain matter, a matter that instantly got him quivering in fear. His previous grandiosity immediately vanished, and all joy evaporated, replaced by alarm and terror. Did you hear? Bai Xiaochun showed up. What, you don't know who Bai Xiaochun is? Well, let me tell you, he performed a 14-fold spirit enhancement on his nascent soul. That's totally crazy. He must have done it with some powerful magical treasure. The Arch-Emperor issued orders that everyone in the Wildlands is supposed to find him and capture him alive. Well, it can't really be any other way. If he ended up becoming the successor of the Hell Emperor, it would be like some gigantic joke. When Bai Xiaochun heard what people were talking about, the blood drained from his face, and he almost fell over on his face because of the fear. He staggered backward, suddenly recalling a key piece of information that had slipped his mind. Anyone who performed a spirit enhancement on their nascent soul would have their name put on display on the Hell Emperor Stele. This is big, he thought. Already, regret was welling up in his heart as he wondered how much of a deadly disaster he had brought upon himself. Heart-pounding with anxiety, he quickly abandoned any ideas of showing off. He also decided that under no circumstances would he let anyone check his nascent soul. Thankfully, because of all the spirit enhancements he had performed, it was extremely powerful. Although people would now be able to sense that he was in the nascent soul stage, they wouldn't be able to see any of the details of his nascent soul. With a bit of adjustment with his mask, he made it seem like, instead of being in the great circle of the early nascent soul stage, he had actually just made a breakthrough. Even as he did that, several beams of light appeared, patrolling soul cultivators of the city guard. They clasped hands and bowed to him, then one of them said, "His Highness the King issued orders that after emerging from secluded meditation, Majordomo Bai is to go see him immediately." Huh? Bai Xiaochun blurted, shivering and heart-pounding. The mere thought of the giant ghost king's stern, threatening features, and the profound gleam that was always present in his eyes which made it seem like he could peer deep into one's mind, caused Bai Xiaochun to shiver. "I'm finished. Kaput." Deep regret filled his heart, and realized that he really should not have gone and performed spirit enhancements on his nascent soul. The entire world knew what had occurred, and the mere thought of that left him weak in the knees. And then he contemplated the potential consequences of his actions, and his heart began to race. Thankfully, he was wearing his mask, and also had years of experience living undercover. Although he feared death as much as he always had, he had long since become an absolute master at keeping up an act. The giant ghost king probably doesn't know my real identity. If he did, he wouldn't just send a message summoning me to a meeting. My mask is incredible, so there's no way anybody can sense my cultivation base fluctuations. Inwardly, he was grasping at every possible straw to comfort himself, but on the outside, he seemed completely calm. Keeping his hands clasped behind his back, he gave a slight nod to the city guards, and then flew with them toward the royal palace. Along the way, his facial expression remained completely normal. However, inside, his mind raced as he tried to figure out why the giant ghost king might have summoned him. In the end, he was 90% confident that it was just a coincidence, and had nothing to do with his true identity. Although that made him feel a bit better, there was still a 10% chance that he was in grave danger. As a result, he couldn't wipe the worry away completely. He simply had to force himself to remain calm, and keep his expression neutral as he followed the guards toward the palace. The guards treated Bai Xiaochun very respectfully. Upon reaching a certain point, they clasped hands and departed, leaving Bai Xiaochun standing in front of the royal palace. A moment later, he strode inside, and the first thing he heard was the voice of Duke Deathcrier. "Your Highness, the Ghost King Orchid has not yet begun to bloom." Furthermore, the Grand Heaven Master made it clear to me that he will not open the necromancer kettle for us alone. Next came the giant Ghost King's voice. Go back to the Grand Heaven Master and tell him that the giant Ghost King agrees to owe him a big favor. Yes, Your Highness. I'll go arrange things right away. A very solemn expression could be seen on Duke Deathcryer's face as he clasped hands and bowed to the giant Ghost King. After turning around to leave, he saw Bai Xiaochun entering the palace, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Giving a quick nod to Bai Xiaochun, he left. Bai Xiaochun hurried over to the throne, doing his best to keep his anxiety under control. Once in front of the giant Ghost King, he clasped hands and bowed deeply. My respects, Your Highness. The giant Ghost King wore a grim expression on his face, as if he were wrestling with some important matter. When he looked over at Bai Xiaochun, a faint expression of surprise could be seen on his face. You made a breakthrough? At first, a look of praise could be seen in his eyes, but after a moment, it turned into something more like suspicion. He was an experienced and shrewd person, with exceptional insight, and had picked up on Bai Xiaochun's nervousness. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had always been nervous in his presence. The difference was that, in the past, he never did anything to cover it up, whereas now, he was. The giant Ghost King's eyes flickered. Bai Xiaochun could immediately see the suspicion in the giant Ghost King's eyes, and it caused his heart to leap into his throat with the realization that he had slipped up. Considering his personality, the fact that he had just made a cultivation-based breakthrough meant that he shouldn't be walking around looking calm. His heart began to race, and his nervousness mounted. Suddenly, an idea occurred to him, and he instantly made his decision. Without the slightest hesitation, he made himself seem even more nervous, so nervous that he even seemed scared. In fact, he averted his gaze so that he wasn't looking at the giant Ghost King. The giant Ghost King looked at him silently, and as he did, vast pressure began to build up in the grand hall. Bai Xiaochun slowly began to tremble visibly, and sweat began to pour down him. It almost seemed like he couldn't control himself, which was actually the case. He actually felt as if so much pressure was weighing down on him that he might be crushed into powder. As the pressure built, Bai Xiaochun finally moaned, Your Highness, your humble servant made a grave error. I didn't want to do it. But the thing is that the three great clans really do have it out for me. If it weren't for the fact that your humble servant has such an impressive title, I think my poor little life would already have been exterminated. By the way, the Bai clan hates me especially deeply. Therefore, your humble servant felt he had no other option. Despite the fact that your highness had other plans for the three clans, your humble servant secretly instructed certain people to go cause problems for them. By this point, Bai Xiaochun really looked like he was about to weep from fear. The giant Ghost King's eyes widened. He had long since learned of the fact that Bai Xiaochun had sent people to put pressure on the three great clans. Therefore, this display of nervousness put him right in the middle of laughter and tears. Obviously, Bai Xiaochun misunderstood why he had been summoned, and had thus begun to grow nervous. Enough with the histrionics, the giant Ghost King said, glaring at Bai Xiaochun. His glare instantly caused Bai Xiaochun to calm down inside. Externally, though, he looked up at the giant Ghost King with glistening eyes. The giant Ghost King could tell that Bai Xiaochun felt wronged, but decided to simply ignore it. Voice casual, he said, I summoned you here today because of some orders that came down from the Arch-Emperor. An arrest warrant has been issued for Bai Xiaochun, Major General from the Great Wall and cultivator from the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. I'm entrusting the matter to you. If Bai Xiaochun appears in the territory I control, you will be sent to arrest him. A serious expression appeared on Bai Xiaochun's face. Without the slightest hesitation, he stuck his chest out and loudly replied, Fear not, Your Highness. It was on my path to Giant Ghost City that I heard about this Bai Xiaochun. HMMMPHH. If Devil Bai dares to appear near Giant Ghost City, then your humble servant will apprehend him immediately. His words were spoken with decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron, and caused the Giant Ghost King to nod in satisfaction. It's not really a big deal, to tell the truth. Unless he actually shows up, just forget about it. However, if you do run into him, be careful. Thankfully, you've made a cultivation-based breakthrough, so that will help to some degree. The Giant Ghost King then went on to offer a few more warnings and exhortations about the matter. Your Highness, when it comes to my cultivation-based breakthrough, I have you to thank. If it weren't for your insistence that I go into secluded meditation, your humble servant would not have succeeded. Your Highness, you truly are divine and mighty, matchless through eternity. The words you spoke to me were like a mystical elixir that pushed me to new heights. Your Highness, I do hope that you summon me more often for audiences, that thusly, my cultivation base can continue to improve with rapid speed. Bai Xiaochun didn't seem embarrassed at all to have so instinctively launched into a bout of flattery. The giant ghost king snorted in response to Bai Xiaochun's words, but inside, actually felt a twinge of pleasure. After all, he couldn't forget about how Bai Hao had had the audacity to slap him across the side of the head and act in wildly presumptuous fashion. Therefore, this complete reversal was quite pleasing. After all, he was a mighty demigod, the type of person who could control every matter around him. If he wanted to, he could forgive anyone of anything. All of the karma had been resolved. In fact, after his cultivation base was restored, a mere thought on his part had retrieved all of the magical items he'd handed over. Everyone respected power, and as for this Bai Hao, even if he got stronger than he would still be at the giant ghost king's beck and call. Therefore, to hear a bit of flattery from him was quite pleasing to the ear. In terms of the fact that Bai Xiaochun had formed his nascent soul without any problems, the giant ghost king wasn't interested in prying, nor did he even think to connect him with the wanted fugitive Bai Xiaochun. It wasn't that the giant ghost king wasn't quick-witted about such things, it was more that Bai Hao had a very clear and well-known background. Therefore, there was no reason to link him to Bai Xiaochun. Although the timing was a bit odd, the giant ghost king knew that since this Bai Hao had received a drop of his own soul blood, that would also make it much easier for him to form a nascent soul. As one of the giant ghost king's subordinates, Bai Hao's power came from the good graces of the king, and for him to get stronger was naturally a good thing. The giant ghost king didn't even bother to look into the matter of the little turtle. After their conversation was done, the giant ghost king waved his hand to dismiss Bai Xiaochun. At this point, Bai Xiaochun was sighing with relief in his heart. Backing up respectfully, he was just preparing to leave when he decided that he needed to make his act even more convincing. Looking over his shoulder, he opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but then held back. The giant ghost king noticed, and said, "What's wrong now, Your Highness? Might it be a good idea to go put a bit more pressure on the three great clans?" From the look in his eye, Bai Xiaochun seemed like he simply wasn't willing to drop the matter. The giant ghost king looked at him grimly for a moment. The truth was that he really did have some special plans in mind for the three great clans. After all, the fact that the incarcerated patriarchs of the Bai and Chen clans had Diva realm cultivation bases was of importance to him. Furthermore, the giant ghost king knew that if the three great clans fell, other clans would rise in their place, and he didn't really feel like dealing with weak, rising powers like that. However, after Bai Xiaochun made his suggestion, the giant ghost king thought about it for a moment, and then recalled the scene of being chased by those three clans. You really were wronged in all of this. Those three clans have been around for thousands of years, and have deep reserve savings. Perhaps that is what gave them the courage to rebel. With that, he gave Bai Xiaochun a meaningful look. Bai Xiaochun was a bit taken aback, but after analyzing the king's words, his eyes began to shine. Then his heart began to pound as he realized that when the giant ghost king said deep reserve savings, he most likely meant that the three great clans were extremely rich. Furthermore, that indicated that the king was hinting that he should go shake them down. Was this his reward for risking life and limb for the giant ghost king? Although he was excited by the prospect, he decided that he should probably double-check that his understanding was correct. Fear not, Your Highness. My eyes are as sharp as swords. It doesn't matter how deep the reserve savings of the three great clans are, your humble servant will see to the bottom of everything. The giant ghost king didn't respond at all, and in fact, even closed his eyes. Inwardly, he was pleased that Bai Xiaochun could pick up on the meaning of his words. Bai Xiaochun was immediately enthused by the giant ghost king's reaction, and that it indicated his implicit agreement. When Bai Xiaochun thought back to how the clans had chased him down, and how he had suddenly risen up in the world, his excitement began to build. A shakedown. I've never done anything like that. How exciting to be able to go shake down an enemy. However, considering the fact that the giant ghost king didn't issue official orders, it indicates that he wants me to keep things low-key. Clenching his fists excitedly, he turned and walked out of the grand hall. Even as he walked out, though, the lounging giant ghost king casually murmured, "The Chen clan is particularly vile. Especially their clan chief. He always gets lucky with the women, and yet he dared to forge a taboo banner. HMPH. Although he spoke nearly under his breath, his words reached Bai Xiaochun's as clear as day. In response, Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped, and he even stopped walking. Eyes turning up in thought, he realized that there were two aspects to what the giant ghost king had said that were important. The first was about the taboo banner, and the second was when he said lucky with the women. As the wheels in his head turned, he murmured to himself, that old pervert. Then, face beaming with righteousness, he pretended to have not heard, and strode out of the hall. After he left, the giant ghost king sat there on his throne, the 5 fingers of his right hand tapping each other as he calculated something. A moment later, he frowned and murmured, I'm still not exactly sure of the timing. However, based on the date, the Ghost King orchid in the necromancer kettle should be just about ready to bloom. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.